So now we're ready to go to slide 2 and start the presentation. So we'll first start by introducing who the presenters are of the webinar session so you can get to know our faces and our names. I've already introduced myself as the moderator, and I'm joined by two project officers who are leading the licensing components of the NPD and NSDF projects respectively. So the first is Dr. Matthew Harrod. He's the project officer and the licensing lead for the Nuclear Power Demonstration Closure Project. And we have Mohammed Sharif Gassem, project officer for the Near Surface Disposal Facility Project. And they're both within the same division as I am in the Canadian Nuclear Laboratories Regulatory Program Division. Next slide. So the key messages that we want you to take away from this webinar, and we give them to you at the beginning as well as the end, just so that you know them upfront. And that's that we're a performance and science-based regulator, and we ensure the health and safety of Canadians and the environment is protected. That's our mandate. Proposed nuclear facilities or activities are subject to systematic and technical review processes, and these processes are integral to our mandate. We consider best available science, international standards, guidelines, and best practices in the execution of our mandate. And CNSC staff's recommendations to the decision-making body, that's our commission, are based on the findings resulting from these technical assessments. We hope that after today's webinar, everyone will have a better understanding of these processes and how they contribute to ensuring we achieve our mandate. So the purpose of today's webinar is to provide, as a first step, project updates on the Near Surface Disposal Facility Project and the Nuclear Power Demonstration Closure Project since the last webinar that we held on December 2nd, 2020. We'll then follow this by a brief outline of our regulatory framework, and that's to set the stage for the main focus of our webinar, which is to provide an overview of our licensing regulatory review process, including technical assessments. So the purpose of this slide is just to situate us in terms of where we are in the series of webinars that we at the CNSC are going to be hosting with respect to these projects. Today's session is the second one that we're having with respect to the NSDF and NPD projects. As I mentioned, our first webinar was held on December 2nd, and what we covered in that one was CNSC's role, who we are, an overview of the regulatory review process for the NSDF and NPD projects, and the status of these projects in the review process. So for today's session, we're not going to revisit the previous topics covered. If you were not able to attend the December 2nd webinar and you just weren't aware of it either, we've included a copy of that presentation in the package that we distributed leading up to today's session. And lastly, as you can see, we are hosting a series of upcoming webinars with respect to these projects, as well as the WR1 in situ decommissioning project, which is located in Pinawa, Manitoba. The webinars are designed to present general information on the topics listed, followed by the remainder of the session focused on having a two-way dialogue in answering any project-specific questions participants may have on the specific topic covered. Registration is now open for all of the webinars listed, and we encourage you all to sign up for the ones you are interested in. We're going to circle back to this slide later in the presentation, which provides more information on each of these webinars and how to register. So like I said, we're first going to begin with project updates. And for this, I'll turn the presentation over to Mohammed Sharif Gassem, project officer and licensing lead for the Near Surface Disposal Facility Project, to present an update on that project.
Thank you, Candida. Good afternoon and welcome, everybody. My name is Mohammed Sharif Gassem, and I'm project officer with the CNSC. And as mentioned before, I'm the licensing lead for the NSDF. And we provide in this slide number 7, where we currently stand with this project. So on December 4th, 2020, Canadian Nuclear Laboratories submitted to the CNSC the final environmental impact statement EIS for the NSDF project, including federal and provincial public and indigenous common disposition tables. On January 26, 2021, the Federal Provincial Review Team of PRT completed their review of CNL's final EIS submission and deemed this submission incomplete. Overall, the FPRT found that CNL has adequately revised the final EIS in response to the majority of the FPRT's information requests. However, CNSC staff found that there is still outstanding information that is required to satisfy requirements for Indigenous engagement. Due to this information gap, CNSC staff cannot draw conclusions nor proceed with finalizing the drafting of the Environmental Assessment Report or EA report. Upon resubmission of the final EIS, CNSC staff will perform a subsequent review. Should the final EIS submission be deemed complete and acceptable at that time, CNSC staff will then notify CNL of the results of the review and proceed with the preparation of an EA report, which will be made available for review by Indigenous groups and the general public prior to public commission hearing. CNSC staff completed the final review of the revised post-closure safety assessment and the safety case for the facility. CNL is expected to submit an updated application for the Chalk River Laboratories license amendment to construct the NSDF to the CNSC Secretariat. The application is being updated to reflect the NSDF being constructed outside of the existing waste management areas, facility authorization, and will include recent project documentation. CNSC will inform CNL when the application is deemed complete and has met the EA and licensing regulatory requirements and CNSC staff expectations. Now I will turn the presentation over to Dr. Matthew Herod, Project Officer and Licensing Lead for the Nuclear Power Demonstration Closure Project.
Thanks, Mohammed, and thanks for coming, everyone. My name is Matthew Herod. I'm the project officer for the NPD and the licensing lead for that project. So here's an update on where we currently stand with the NPD site closure project. On December 15th, 2020, CNL, Canadian Nuclear Laboratories, submitted a revised draft environmental impact statement for the proposed NPD closure project to the CNSC, which included an updated environmental impact statement, updated technical supporting documents, and updated responses to all federal and provincial comments and information requests. CNSC staff conducted a completeness check at that time, and on January 15, 2021, and determined that insufficient information was provided to enable the federal and provincial review team to proceed with the EIS technical review. CNL is expected to provide additional information and resubmit the revised EIS and supporting documents at a later date, which is expected now at the end of April. The licensing technical review is currently ongoing and includes review of numerous key documents regarding post-closure safety, waste inventory, design, and as well as additional technical areas. I'll now discuss the CNSC's regulatory framework. Peter, if you could go to the next slide. And the next one, please. Thanks. So to safely regulate an evolving nuclear sector, the CNSC maintains an effective and flexible regulatory framework. The figure on this slide depicts the main elements of the CNSC's nuclear regulatory framework. We start with the enabling legislation, the Nuclear Safety and Control Act, or NSCA, from which all of our other regulations and regulatory documents flow. Next are the regulations, which are the laws of the land and bind all Canadians. Under the Act, the Commission may make regulations which set out requirements. Multiple regulations set out the high-level criteria for waste management. From this, licenses with license condition handbooks, certificates, and others are all elements of the framework. Licenses and certificates set out more specific legally binding requirements for each license. Licenses permit and control its use and to only those authorized. Once a license is obtained, it establishes the CNSC's powers to ensure that activities are conducted safely through the processes of verifying, enforcing, and reporting compliance. For example, licenses can contain requirements for licensees to maintain a waste management program, a decommissioning plan, and a financial guarantee. Regulatory documents, or reg docs, provide detail and clarification of the licensing and other regulatory requirements with respect to the Act, regulations, and license conditions. They tend to use the word shall or must to denote any mandatory requirements. Non-mandatory text provides additional guidance to applicants and licensees about how to meet the regulatory requirements, and they tend to use the word should or is expected to, which denote guidance. Guidance is used to further explain the basis for requirements, is based on best practices developed all over the world and despite it being non-mandatory. RegDocs consider best regulatory practices from other countries and international standards, such as the IEA standards, and are used in a manner consistent with CNSC's overall regulatory approach. The CNSC has based many of its RegDocs on IEA standards and will continue to do so as they are revised. CNSC regulatory documents are also complemented by documents produced by the Canadian Standards Association, and CNSC staff are involved in the development of nuclear CSA standards. Nuclear CSA standards are also influenced by the IEA standards. The CNSC has recently revised its regulatory framework for waste management and decommissioning and published RegDoc 211.1 volumes 1 and 3, as well as RegDoc 211.2 and RegDoc 3.3.1 in January 2021. The high-level criteria set out in the regulations are expanded on in the recently revised regulatory documents for waste management and decommissioning, which contain detailed requirements and guidance. The CNSC continuously reviews and adjusts its regulatory framework to ensure that the regulatory requirements are modern, clear, and supported by guidance where necessary, and that the CNSC is ready to regulate new and emerging technologies. The CNSC is committed to providing regulatory instruments that make its expectations clear. And the CNSC has adopted a life cycle approach to its catalog of published regulations and documents. Published documents are reviewed every 5 years as part of our commitment to update regulatory requirements, and published regulatory documents are considered to be living documents subject to regulatory review, so that your feedback is welcome at any time. CNSC strives to align our regulatory framework with the IEA, and we frequently adopt national and international standards such as the National Building Code or National Fire Code into our regulatory oversight of licensed facilities. In addition, CNSC's performance-based approach provides flexibility on how licensees comply with requirements. Next slide, please. So now I'll talk about CNSC licenses. In a similar fashion to the government granting a qualified driver a driver's license, the CNSC grants licenses for nuclear-related activities. A CNSC license allows the holder to conduct a nuclear activity under the conditions specified in their license, much like a driver's license, which allows the holder to legally drive. Similarly, the licenses are legally binding and hold within them legal ramifications if the license conditions are not followed exactly as outlined in the license. For example, certain driver's licenses dictate strict driving times, allowable blood alcohol levels, etc. In a similar fashion, when the CNSC grants a license, there are limitations on what the holder of the license is allowed to do. Possession of certain radioactive substances, what can be done with these substances, and how they are to be accounted for, and so on. There are also strict conditions that need to be met, such as reporting requirements, health and safety of workers and the public, as well as environmental protection requirements. Each CNSC license contains all the specifics regarding what activities can be conducted under the umbrella of that particular license. It also includes information such as when the license was granted and when it expires, as well as the activities authorized under that license, as well as who is allowed to conduct those activities. The license will also contain information about the roles and responsibilities of the licensee with regard to those activities, such as environmental monitoring, reporting requirements, health and safety measures, and so on. It is important to note that this analogy only applies in a general sense and is not a direct comparison, as the CNSC licensing process is very rigorous, detailed, and encompasses all aspects of nuclear facility operation for the entirety of the facility life cycle. The licensing basis is now explained on the next slide. So, just as the Highway Traffic Act, which regulates the licensing of vehicles, is the benchmark law and provides the boundaries for all drivers, the licensing basis sets the boundary conditions for acceptable performance at a regulated facility or activity and establishes the basis for the licensee's compliance program. The NSCA and its regulations and the license and the law are the law that the licensees have to abide by in the same way that the applicable laws for drivers are found in the Highway Traffic Act. Specifically, the licensing basis is a set of regulatory requirements and documents for a facility or activity. These consist of the regulatory requirements set out in the applicable laws and regulations, the conditions and safety and control measures described in the facility's license and the documents directly referenced in that license, the safety and control measures described in the license application and the documents submitted by the proponent to support that license application. The documents needed to support the license application are those that demonstrate the proponent is qualified to carry out the licensed activity and that appropriate provisions are in place to protect worker and public health and safety, to protect the environment, and to maintain national security and measures required to implement Canada's international obligations. Examples are detailed documents supporting the design, safety analysis, and all aspects of operation and maintenance, and more. I'll now turn over the presentation to Mohammed to cover the licensing regulatory review process.
Mohammed, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. So thanks, Matt. Saying we're on slide 15. So the CNSC is responsible for licensing nuclear facilities and activities and oversight over their full life cycle. The CNSC takes a stepwise cradle-to-grave approach to licensing nuclear facilities and activities. The approach is driven by the activities that have to take place in a certain order. That is, a license cannot operate before they're built. They can't build before the confirmed site suitability, and the necessary information must be submitted to show readiness before moving on to the next activity. This stage approach allows for life cycle consideration for each stage of development and regulatory controls appropriate to each license. For example, an application to construct a facility needs to show consideration of the planned operations and its subsequent decommissioning, etc. Each stage of the licensing process has its own set of criteria and requirements. No work can proceed until each application meets all of the requirements set forth by the CNSC. Proponents must demonstrate to the CNSC that their projects will cause no adverse effects to the health of Canadians and the environment. Only then will CNSC staff recommend to the Commission that a license be granted for that project. Next slide, please. So under the NSCA and its regulations, the CNSC staff undertake a thorough licensing assessment of the application. From a big picture, an overview of the process is illustrated here. CNSC staff assess the proponent submissions and scrutinize the technical documents, safety assessment against the regulatory requirements of the NSCA and its associated regulations, as well as CNSC regulatory and guidance documents, CSA standards, and the IEA standards and guidance. This is captured in the environmental review and technical assessment boxes in the figure above. Proponent submissions, including the technical documentation, undergoes several rounds of review through a multi-step process. This is so that CNSC staff can ensure that adequate supporting documents are provided, regulatory requirements and staff expectations are fulfilled, and international industry best practices are followed. And the information provided is sufficient to ensure work will be done safely by the licensee as the Commission approves the application. CNSC staff also determine whether the proponent is qualified and has made adequate provision for the protection of health and safety of people and the environment. Proponents must also demonstrate the required measures to maintain national security and implement Canada's international obligations for the peaceful use of nuclear energy. So upon receipt of a license application, A facility assessment and compliance FAC team is shaped and formally established for all the relevant applicable safety and control areas. The FAC team consists of technical and specialist staff from the technical services branch, the regulatory operations branch, and others such as indigenous consultation and legal services, to name only a few. The FAC team is responsible for the conduct of the technical assessments and the regulatory licensing review of the proposed license application. The FAC team will also be responsible for the development of facility-specific compliance plans for licensed facility or activity. The FAC team will oversee compliance of the licensee and conduct inspections when approval or license is granted by the Commission and during the period where valid CNSC license is in effect. Following this review, there are public hearings where the Commission considers oral and written evidence from CNSC staff, the applicant, members of the public, and indigenous peoples. Considering all the evidence presented to them, they make a decision. If the Commission decides the license application will be approved, CNSC staff then undertake compliance verification and performance monitoring against the licensee, which will be the subject of a future webinar held in May. I should highlight as well that throughout the licensing process and all facility life cycle stages, environmental monitoring and indigenous and public involvement are ongoing. Next slides, please. Sorry. So in slide 17, so what are the technical assessments? When the CNSC receives a license application, it is comprised of a series of documents needed to support the license application. These are the documents that demonstrate that the proponent meets the requirements in CNSC regulatory framework. Examples include detailed documents supporting the design, safety analysis, and all aspects of operation and maintenance, etc. If a license is issued, these documents become part of the facility licensing basis and provide the framework for all activities conducted at the facility and permissible under the license. Returning to our driving analogy, the technical assessment process is loosely analogous to the driver's exam road test that evaluates if the proponent can drive according to the legal requirements of their driver's license. Next slide, please. We're on slide 18. The CNSC technical assessment of a license application is a multi-step process as depicted in the graphic on this slide. Information submitted in support of an application must demonstrate that the proposed safety and control measures will meet or exceed regulatory requirements and CNSC expectations. All submissions are expected to be supported by appropriate analytical, experimental, and other suitable evidence. When the license application and supporting documentation are received, they are reviewed by CNSC technical experts, many of whom have advanced degrees through the science-based, risk-informed technical assessment process. Technical assessments demand rigorous engineering and scientific analysis taking into consideration the CNSC experience and knowledge of best practices. CNSC staff assess the documents against regulations, regulatory documents, international guidance, Canadian Standard Association, and professional judgment, and etc. This assessment can be carried out with input from third parties such as academia or international experts, as well as all the relevant federal, provincial, and territorial government departments as required. Examples include departments or agencies responsible for regulating health and safety, environmental protection, emergency preparedness, and the transportation of dangerous goods. Also, CNSC staff can perform internal verification as necessary as safety analysis modeling and peer reviews, All involved parties consider operational experience and benchmarking. Examples of topics covered in the technical assessment include long-term safety assessment, operational safety analysis, detailed decommissioning plan, waste inventory, etc. If CNSC staff conclude that an application is not complete or satisfactory, the proponent will be asked to submit additional information and or revise the documents to reflect changes to address CNSC staff comments. The revised document is then reviewed once again by CNSC staff. This process continues until staff are satisfied all requirements are met. Normally, applications do not proceed on a decision until staff are satisfied that the application contains all of the relevant information needed for the commission to make a licensing decision and that all regulatory requirements have been met. Next slide, please. So we're in slide 19. CNSC technical assessment are anchored in a framework of 14 technical areas known as safety and control areas, or SCAs. The SCA framework is designed to allow CNSC staff to evaluate all applications consistently and provide a platform to ensure that all aspects relevant to the safety and security are thoroughly reviewed using a risk-informed approach. The conduct of technical assessment CTA process provide guidance on how to effectively and consistently prepare for conducting the technical assessment, complete sufficiency checks of the information provided according to applicable criteria, and provide technical conclusions and recommendations to support making regulatory recommendations. Technical assessment are integral to the regulatory assessment process, and as such, represent a major component of the core work conducted daily by CNSC staff. The results of each technical assessment are the technical conclusions and recommendations that are considered in conjunction with all the regulatory information to make overall regulatory recommendations to the Commission. A technical assessment reference matrix, or TARM, is a tool used to support staff in carrying out technical assessment. It is a matrix of information on reviewed topics and technical assessment criteria by facility activity. The TARM provides a set of criteria that can be used to assess the licensee proposed safety and control measures by each SCA. Applicable codes and standards are included in the facility TARM. TARMs for NSDF and NPD were prepared by CNSC staff and shared with the proponent. The NSDF NPD TARMs cover all national and international standards that the proponent's submission are reviewed against. CNSC verifies the adequacy of the design, construction, commissioning, operation, decommissioning, and closure of the facility against the respective TARMs. And this will extend to the post-closure. We're on slide number 20. So one good example of the technical assessment process is the review of the waste acceptance criteria for the NSDF project. The WAC, which is defined as the technical and administrative requirements that the waste must meet in order for it to be accepted at the treatment, storage, or disposal facility, has been one of the key documents of the licensing assessment of the NSDF. The WAC describes the limits on the chemical, radiological, biological, and physical properties of the waste that will be placed in the NSDF. The CNSC began their review of the WAC back in 2017. Since then, this document has been reviewed a number of times by CNL at the request of CNSC technical experts that provided comments and feedback regarding radionuclides activity concentrations, radiation protection for workers, tracking of waste inventory, reference inventory, waste characterization plans, and others. Generally, staff's comments requested greater clarification, additional information, and alignment with the IEA and CSA requirements and guidance in these areas. I will now pass the final portion of the presentation to Candida.
Thanks, Mohammed. So we're now just going to move on to sort of the later stages of that review process when we come to a point where staff are of the view that we have complete information to proceed to a hearing, and what opportunities there are as part of those final stages. So we're always interested in hearing what Indigenous peoples, members of the public, and stakeholders have to say regarding any of the projects that we license. And there are many ways in which you can get involved and be heard. So I just spoke to how there's a commission hearing process at the final stages of a project where everyone is encouraged to participate, make their views heard and understood directly to the decision-making body, the commission. And they really do take all of the information that's presented to them and consider it all in informing their decision. So we really do encourage anybody that is interested in these projects to participate in that part of the process. So to learn more about how to intervene and what the role of an intervener is in this process and how to participate, we've provided the link on this slide, which gives you more of that fulsome information. You can also stay abreast of other opportunities to participate in future engagement activities, such as this webinar and future webinar series that we have by signing up to our subscribers list. The other things that we share through that subscribers list are you can provide general inquiries. You can find out more about opportunities to intervene in other processes. There's also consultation periods on regulatory documents and regulations. And so we give you sort of that important information and the deadlines for that through that info subscriber list. So we've also indicated and provided you the link on how to sign up for that info subscriber list as we provide important news through that. But we also do through many other channels, such as our social media platforms as well, that you can check out on our Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube channel. Moving on to the next slide. So we just wanted to leave you with a quick summary of today's presentation and really capturing again those key messages, and that our licensing regulatory review process and the associated technical assessments are really an integral part of our mandate and our commitment to protecting Canadians and the environment. By using a science and risk-based approach, CNSC staff aim to ensure that any and all nuclear activities conducted within Canada meet all of the relevant safety rules and regulations. To learn more about our commitment to safety, please sign up for the other webinars that we're going to be hosting in this series, which will hopefully provide audiences with more information regarding our holistic approach. Next slide. So speaking about that webinar series, I said at the beginning that we'd show them to you again, and hopefully this slide is a little bit helpful in providing a little overview on each upcoming webinar. Giving you a little bit of detail of what we will cover in those specific topics. And again, they're going to be of a general nature, but we will have our specialists available to answer project-specific questions when it comes to the NSDF project, the NPD project, as well as the WR1 in situ decommissioning project. Invitation to these webinars have already been sent to our CNSC info subscriber list. You'll also see them being advertised on our social media platforms. Registration is also available through our CNSC main webpage, but for ease of reference, we've also included the registration link on this slide. So we really hope to see you all there, and that some of these are of interest to you, and that we can continue that discussion on our holistic approach with you in those. So that concludes the end of our presentation.